My name is Walter Hensley, and I never thought a phone call from my only daughter could make me feel this hollow. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning, the kind that smells of fresh rain and old wood. I was sitting by the window with my coffee, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes, when my phone rang. Lydia's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart lifted. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "Are you still coming next week?" She hesitated. I heard her sigh, then the sound of typing in the background. Her office, maybe. "Dad, listen about that trip," she started, her tone uneven. "I had to cancel Hawaii. Things got crazy at work, and the tickets are ridiculous right now. I'm really sorry." For a moment, I didn't understand. I blinked at the quiet living room, the folded Hawaiian shirts on the couch, the old suitcase I'd pulled out of the attic, the small lei I'd bought from the thrift shop just to surprise her. "Oh," I said softly. That's all right, honey. Work comes first. I'll make it up to you, I promise," she said, her voice suddenly cheerful again. "Maybe in a few months, okay?" We talked for another minute, mostly about nothing. When she hung up, the silence in my house became unbearable. I looked around at the birthday decorations I'd already started hanging, blue streamers, her favorite color. My hands trembled slightly as I took them down, one by one. That night, I sat on the porch, the sound of crickets loud in the dark. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, though I hadn't touched the stuff since my wife, Margaret, passed away. She used to say whiskey makes loneliness feel heavier, and she was right. The next morning, I went about my usual routine: coffee, feed the stray cat that always came to my door, and check the mailbox. There was a card from Lydia last year still pinned on the fridge, the one that said, "To the best dad in the world." I kept glancing at it, wondering when exactly things had changed. Lydia used to be my shadow. When she was little, she followed me everywhere, to the garage, the garden, even fishing on weekends. After Margaret's death, she was my only anchor. She called every evening for months, worried that I wouldn't eat or sleep. But as her life moved forward, the new job, the fancy apartment downtown, the boyfriend I barely knew, her calls became shorter. Her laughter sounded different, more distant. I tried not to notice, but every parent knows when their child is slowly walking away. That Thursday phone call confirmed it. Still, I told myself maybe she truly couldn't afford the trip. Maybe her work was suffocating her. I tried to believe her, because that's what fathers do. 3 days later, my neighbor Ellen knocked on my door. She's a kind woman in her 60s who bakes pies for everyone on the block. But that morning, she wasn't smiling. "Walter," she said, clutching her phone like it was made of glass. "I don't want to upset you, but is this your daughter?" She turned the screen toward me. My heart stopped. There was Lydia, my Lydia, smiling on a beach, her hair tied up with a red ribbon. Behind her, palm trees swayed and turquoise water shimmered. She held a cocktail with a pink umbrella and wore a wide-brimmed hat I'd given her for her birthday last year. The caption read, "Finally, paradise. #Hawaii vibes, #blessed." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. Ellen's eyes softened. "Maybe it's old photos," she offered gently. I nodded, though I knew better. Lydia's phone case in that picture. I'd seen it just last week on a video call. A glittery pink one with her initials. No, this wasn't an old photo. "Thank you, Ellen," I murmured. "I appreciate it." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my cold cup of coffee. The walls around me seemed to close in, whispering questions I couldn't answer. Why did she lie? Why couldn't she just tell me the truth? I picked up my landline and almost dialed her number, but my hand froze halfway. What would I even say? That I knew? That I saw her smiling in paradise while I sat here alone in a house filled with dust and silence? Instead, I opened my old laptop. I hadn't used social media in years, but I still remembered her profile. It took a few minutes to log in, but when I finally got in, there it was, photo after photo of her vacation. Smiling, laughing, surrounded by people I didn't know. In one of them, she stood beside a tall man in sunglasses, the same boyfriend she'd mentioned briefly months ago. The caption under that one said, "Work hard, play harder. Grateful for this getaway." My fingers trembled over the keyboard. I wanted to write something, a comment, a message, anything, but I didn't. I just stared. It wasn't about the money. It was the lie. The deliberate, cruel choice to tell me she couldn't come because things were hard, while she danced under the Hawaiian sun. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon drift behind the clouds, thinking about all the birthdays, the sacrifices, the years I'd spent saving for her college, her first car, her wedding that never happened. I had given her everything I could. And now, for the first time in my life, I felt something dark stirring inside me. Not anger, not grief, something quieter, colder, a decision forming. Because sometimes, when your own child lies to you, you don't scream. You don't confront them. You wait. You let the silence do the work. And when the right time comes, you make sure they finally understand what canceled really means. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that cold kind of silence that makes you realize just how alone you are. The coffee machine sputtered and hissed, filling the air with its usual comfort, but even that sound felt distant. I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. The way Lydia's smile looked, bright, effortless, almost rehearsed. I'd spent the night staring at them until my eyes burned, memorizing every detail. The white sand, the hotel logo printed on the towel behind her, even the little heart emoji she'd added to her captions. For years, I told myself that our bond could never break, that no matter how far she moved, she'd always find her way back home. But now I realized she already had a new home, a new life, one that didn't include me. I didn't call her. Not yet. Instead, I went through my day as if nothing had happened. I mowed the lawn, fed the stray cat that had started sleeping on my porch, fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. From the outside, I probably looked like an ordinary old man enjoying his retirement. But inside, something had changed. In the evening, Ellen stopped by again, holding a pie. Apple this time, she said softly, trying to sound cheerful. You looked pale yesterday. I smiled and thanked her. Ellen had been a widow for 12 years. She understood loneliness in a way few people could. We sat on the porch, watching the sky turn orange and pink. You know, she said after a while, kids these days live fast. They forget that parents need them too. I nodded. She used to call me every Sunday. Then it turned into once a month. Now, I suppose, she calls when she needs something. Ellen gave me a sympathetic look. Maybe she just doesn't realize how much it hurts. Maybe, I said quietly. But I knew better. Lydia was smart. She always had been. She knew exactly what she was doing. After Ellen left, I sat at the table with a pen and paper, an old habit from before emails and texts took over. I wrote Lydia a short letter. Dear Lydia, I hope you're doing well. I saw some photos from your trip. Hawaii looks beautiful. I'm glad you got the rest you needed. Love, Dad. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even mention the lie. I just folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and left it on my kitchen counter. I had no intention of sending it. It was just something I needed to get out of my chest. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Lydia. Dad, she said cheerfully. How are you? Sorry I haven't called. Things have been crazy since I got back from work. Her hesitation didn't escape me. Work, huh? I said, pretending not to notice. Busy week. Oh, you have no idea, she laughed. Back-to-back meetings, late nights, just exhausting. I let her talk. About her promotion, her new apartment, the projects that were supposedly keeping her up till midnight. Every word was like a small, calculated lie, layered over the last. When she finally paused to breathe, I said softly, You sound happy, sweetheart. I'm glad you got some rest. You deserve it. There was silence on the other end. Just for a second, but I felt it. She knew. She knew I knew. Thanks, Dad, she said finally. Listen, I've got to run, but I'll call soon, okay? Of course, I said. Take care of yourself. After we hung up, I sat back and smiled. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. I had spent my entire life teaching Lydia that honesty mattered more than success, that money could be earned again, but trust, once broken, rarely returns. I thought she understood, but maybe she needed to learn it the hard way. Over the next few days, I started paying attention. Her social media was a goldmine of truth disguised as vanity. Dinners, spa visits, parties. All those things she said she couldn't afford. She'd become a different person. The girl who once cried over a scraped knee now laughed with strangers holding champagne glasses. And me? I just watched. I observed. Quietly. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. My heart leapt when I saw her handwriting on the envelope. But when I opened it, the excitement faded. Dad, I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking a lot lately. Maybe you should consider selling the house. It's too big for you alone, and the market's great right now. You could move closer to me. Think about it, please. Love, L. I read it twice. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. She didn't write out, love, Lydia. Just L. Like a business signature. Selling the house. This was the same house where she'd taken her first steps. The house her mother painted every summer. The garden where I buried our old dog. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer. I didn't tear it. I didn't throw it away. I just let it sit there, a reminder. That night, as the wind howled outside, I went to the attic. The air smelled of dust and cedar. I found an old wooden chest where Margaret had kept family albums, her journals, and some old savings bonds. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. Lydia's childhood smile beamed from every photo. Messy hair, missing teeth, pure joy. Somewhere along the line, that little girl had vanished. But I wasn't angry anymore. No, anger was too easy. What I felt was purpose, a quiet kind of strength, the kind that grows in silence, waiting for the right moment to be heard. I closed the chest, dusted off my hands, and whispered to the empty room. You want me to sell the house, Lydia? Then you'll see what this house really means. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Because now, I had a plan, one that didn't need shouting or confrontation or revenge. Just patience. The kind of patience only a father can have. A few days passed after Lydia's letter, but I couldn't stop thinking about those words. You should consider selling the house. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a push. A gentle, manipulative nudge dressed as concern. I'd seen it before, long ago, in the way her mother's relatives tried to talk Margaret into selling this place after she died. Back then, Lydia defended me. This is my home too, she'd said. But now she sounded just like them. That morning, I sat in the living room surrounded by the ghosts of my life. The ticking clock, the faint smell of furniture polish, the faded curtains Margaret had sewn herself. Every piece of this house had a story, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. But I needed to know why Lydia wanted me to sell it. So I decided to dig, quietly. The next time she called, I played my part perfectly. Dad, she said brightly. Did you get my letter? Oh, yes, I replied, keeping my tone light. You might be right. The house is getting a bit big for me. She took the bait instantly. Exactly. You could sell it, move closer to me, and not worry about maintenance anymore. It's just practical. Maybe, I said. Do you think I could get a good price for it? Oh, definitely, she said quickly. I actually know someone who can help. A friend of a friend, a realtor. He's really good. Her eagerness was too sharp, too rehearsed. I smiled to myself. All right, sweetheart. Why don't you have him give me a call? Really? That's great, Dad. I'll tell him to reach out tomorrow. After we hung up, I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they formed. The next day, around noon, the phone rang again. Mr. Hensley, a man's voice said smoothly. This is Mark Ellison. I'm a real estate consultant. Your daughter, Lydia, mentioned you might be looking to sell your property? His tone was too confident, the kind of tone that came from someone who already thought the deal was his. Well, I said slowly, I'm just exploring my options. I understand, he replied. But from what Lydia told me, the market value of your home could be over $800,000. That's an incredible opportunity. I'd be happy to come by, take a look, and make things simple for you. $800,000. I'd lived here my whole life and never thought about the number attached to these walls. It wasn't just money, it was decades of memories. And now, I realized, that number was exactly what they were after. I told him I'd think about it. He insisted again, promising he could handle everything so I wouldn't have to lift a finger. When I hung up, the silence of the room grew heavy again. The clock ticked louder, almost mocking me. It was clear now, Lydia's trip to Hawaii wasn't some coincidence. She'd been celebrating something, maybe even this plan. A plan to convince me to sell my house, to hand over the only thing I had left of my life with Margaret. That night, I went through my old files, the mortgage papers, tax receipts, even Margaret's will. I'd forgotten how neatly she'd kept everything. She used to say, Walter, someday our home will protect you, even when I'm gone. And she was right. I sat there until midnight, the light flickering as I flipped through every document, looking for something that might give me an edge, something that would remind me who this house truly belonged to. Then I found it, an old notarized paper Margaret had filed years ago. a clause in her will that transferred the full property rights to me and explicitly stated that Lydia would inherit only under my written consent. I smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a cruel smile, more like relief. The kind that comes when you realize the ground beneath you is still solid. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt something else, a quiet sorrow. My daughter had been trying to deceive me, and yet, here I was, planning how to protect her from herself. The next morning, I called Ellen. "Could you do me a favor?" I asked. "Of course, Walter. What is it?" "I need you to come over when that realtor visits. Just to help me take notes. I want a witness." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll be there." That afternoon, Mark Ellison showed up in a dark blue suit, all smiles and cologne. Lydia wasn't with him, but her fingerprints were all over his words. He walked through the house, nodding at the furniture, pretending to admire the space. "Beautiful property, Mr. Hensley. You could make a small fortune here." "I'm sure," I said, leaning on my cane. "But tell me, how did you and my daughter meet?" "Oh, through her fiancé," he said quickly. "We've worked together a few times." Her fiancé. That was new. She hadn't mentioned anyone serious lately. "Interesting," I said. "And what exactly did she tell you about this sale?" He smiled, that polite, professional smile people use when they think they're dealing with someone too old to ask the right questions. "She just said you were ready to downsize. She wanted to make sure everything went smoothly for you." I nodded slowly. "That's very thoughtful of her." Ellen stood behind me, her arms crossed, watching every move he made. When he finally left, I walked her to the door. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly. She looked at me with concern. "Walter, she's planning something, isn't she?" I sighed. "Yes, but she doesn't realize she's not the only one who can plan." That evening, I sat by the window, the sunset spilling gold across the floorboards. The decision was clear now. The lie had reached its limit. It was time to stop waiting. Time to act, not out of anger, but out of truth. If Lydia wanted to sell my house, then she was about to learn what happens when you try to put a price tag on someone's past. And I wasn't going to raise my voice. I would simply let her see what she'd traded for her paradise. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I hadn't slept much, but for the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. Lydia wanted me to sell the house. Her mysterious fiancé and this slick realtor were clearly in on something together. They thought I'd simply sign whatever papers they put in front of me, that I was too old, too sentimental, too soft. They were wrong. I brewed my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness wake me up. Then I went to my desk, pulled out my worn leather notebook, and started to write. Not letters this time, but plans. Steps. Names. Numbers. I wasn't going to scream or accuse. I'd learned long ago that rage burns fast, but truth lasts forever. At 9 sharp, I called Richard Murphy, an old friend from my working days. He was a retired lawyer, now spending his mornings fishing by Lake Clara. He answered after 2 rings. "Walter, haven't heard your voice in a while. What's the occasion?" "I need your help, Richard," I said. "Family matter." There was a pause, the kind that comes from a man who's heard too many bad stories. "Come by around noon," he said. "Bring whatever papers you've got." By the time I arrived, the lake shimmered under the midday light. Richard looked older, slower, but his mind was still sharp as glass. I told him everything. The canceled trip, the photos, the letter, the realtor. He listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a low whistle. "She's trying to liquidate your assets through a proxy," he said. "Common trick. I've seen this before. Someone convinces an elder parent to sell, then they intercept or manage the funds." I swallowed hard. "So what can I do?" He smiled faintly. "Play along. Let them believe it's working. But every step they take will be recorded, signed, and witnessed under your conditions. You'll need a fake sale agreement. One that looks real but keeps the title in your name. Think of it as a performance." I nodded slowly. "A performance," I repeated. "That's exactly what it'll be." He drafted a few documents, making them look official enough to fool anyone not reading the fine print. Then he gave me a copy. "When they bring in their buyer or signatory, you show this version. I'll notarize it quietly. It'll buy you time and evidence." I thanked him and drove home. The whole way, I couldn't stop thinking about Lydia's face when she'd finally realize I wasn't as helpless as she imagined. That evening, I called her. "Sweetheart," I said warmly. I've been thinking about that realtor friend of yours. Maybe I should go through with it. I'm not getting any younger." She sounded surprised, caught off guard. "Really? Dad, that's great. Mark said he could have a buyer lined up soon. I'm so proud of you for making this decision." Her tone was all sugar, but I could hear the greed underneath. "I'd like you to be here when we sign," I said. "It's a big step for me." "Of course," she replied quickly. "I'll bring Mark and, Daniel. He's been helping me with everything lately." Daniel. So the fiancé had a name now. After the call, I sat back and looked around my living room. The framed photos, the smell of wood polish, the sound of the clock ticking softly. Everything here carried 50 years of life, and they wanted to trade it for a check. That night, I went to Ellen's house and knocked gently. She opened the door in her robe, surprised but smiling. "Walter? Everything all right? I just wanted to ask if you'd mind being present when Lydia visits. You don't have to say anything. Just be there." She looked at me carefully. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "Not revenge," I said. "Just the truth. Sometimes that's enough." She nodded slowly. "I'll be there." A few days later, Lydia's car rolled into the driveway. A sleek white SUV, shining like money. She stepped out in designer sunglasses, Daniel following behind her in a sharp gray suit. Mark, the realtor, came last, carrying a folder. "Dad," she said brightly, rushing over to hug me. The perfume she wore was heavy, artificial sweetness. "You look beautiful, honey," I said. "Let's go inside." We sat in the living room. Ellen was there, pretending to tidy up some papers near the window. Mark spread out the documents on the table. "Here's the purchase agreement, Mr. Hensley. Once you sign, I'll handle the rest. Funds can be transferred within 72 hours. Daniel placed his hand on Lydia's shoulder. "We'll help manage everything, Mr. Hensley. You won't have to worry about a thing." I leaned back, pretending to read slowly. "Very kind of you," I said. "But I asked my lawyer to prepare a version that protects me, just in case. He said this one's even simpler." I handed them Richard's fake contract. Identical on the surface, except for one hidden clause. Title remains under Walter Hensley until both parties' legal verification within 1 year. Lydia didn't even glance at it. She smiled and said, "Perfect, Dad. I trust you." I signed it with a steady hand, Ellen quietly observing. They left an hour later, laughing, excited, sure of their success. When the door finally closed, Ellen turned to me. "They really believe it's done." I nodded. "Let them. The more they believe, the harder the truth will hit." I walked to the window and watched their car disappear down the street. The sunlight caught the dust in the air, and for a moment, it felt like Margaret was there, like she approved. I whispered to the empty room. "This house isn't going anywhere, my love. Not yet." Because sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire or fury. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a quiet smile and a signature that means absolutely nothing. 3 days passed after the so-called signing, and the house felt eerily peaceful, like it was holding its breath. I went about my usual routine, feeding the stray cat, trimming the hedge, and reading the morning paper as if nothing monumental had just happened. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't the confused, heartbroken father anymore. I was a man with clarity and a secret. The first call came on a Friday afternoon. "Dad." Lydia's voice burst through the phone, bright and breathless. "It's done. Mark told me the buyer confirmed everything. You'll get the payment next week. Isn't that amazing?" I smiled to myself. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You must be proud." "I am," she said quickly. "And listen, once the transaction clears, I think it's best if you move in with us for a while. Just until you adjust." Adjust? Such a small, polite word to cover such an ugly truth. "Of course," I said calmly. "You've thought of everything." She giggled. "You raised a planner, remember?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I remember." After we hung up, I stared out the window at the long stretch of my yard. The maple tree I planted with Margaret years ago stood tall, its leaves turning amber in the late autumn light. She'd always said it would outlive both of us, that trees carry our stories longer than our words do. I wasn't ready to let mine end yet. The following Monday, a letter arrived, official-looking, thick paper with embossed print. Inside was a copy of the contract confirmation from Mark's agency. It was identical to the one we'd signed, except this one had a forged clause transferring ownership immediately. So they'd edited it. They'd forged my signature. I sat down, letting the weight of it settle. There it was, the line between disappointment and betrayal, crossed cleanly without hesitation. That evening, I called Richard. They forged it, I said simply. He whistled through the receiver. Then it's time to tighten the rope. You have the notarized copy I prepared? Right here, I said, patting the folder on my desk. Good. You'll want witnesses when the crash comes. Make it public if you can. Let them hang themselves by their own arrogance. The next morning, I invited Lydia and Daniel over for dinner. A small celebration, I said cheerfully, for new beginnings. They arrived early, dressed like success, Lydia in a soft white blouse, Daniel in a tailored blazer. They brought a bottle of expensive wine and the kind of smiles you wear when you believe the game's already won. The table was set with Margaret's old china, the same plates we'd used for Lydia's 16th birthday. I'd polished them until they gleamed under the chandelier. Ellen was there too, pretending to help in the kitchen, but really, she was my silent witness once more. Dinner began pleasantly. Lydia talked about how they were planning to refresh the property once everything cleared. We'll probably remodel the kitchen first, she said casually. Open concept, you know. It'll raise the resale value. I smiled. Resale value? You mean you're not moving in? She froze slightly. Oh, maybe later. We'll see. Daniel jumped in. It's just an investment, Mr. Hensley. You'll still have a place with us, of course. Ellen met my eyes across the table. I could tell she wanted to say something, but I gave a tiny shake of my head. An investment, I repeated, sipping my wine. Interesting choice of word. The air grew tight. Lydia forced a laugh. Dad, don't make that face. We're just trying to help. I know, sweetheart, I said softly. In fact, I appreciate it so much that I called my lawyer this morning to tell him how proud I am of you both. Daniel's fork paused midair. Your lawyer? Yes, I said. Richard Murphy. You remember him? He notarized the contract. Said it was one of the safest sales he's seen. The silence that followed was almost musical. Lydia blinked, her voice small now. He notarized it? Of course. You wouldn't want your father signing something without legal oversight, would you? Daniel's jaw tightened. That wasn't necessary. We already had. Another copy? I interrupted gently. Yes, I received that one too. Quite creative, actually. You even managed to imitate my signature. Took me a while to notice the difference. Lydia's face went pale. Dad? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, I said quietly. Please, don't lie again. The room went utterly still. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out Richard's notarized version, the real one, and laid it on the table. The gold seal shimmered faintly under the light. This, I said calmly, is the only version the state recognizes. It keeps ownership in my name until verification next year. Any other copy is considered fraudulent. Daniel's voice rose slightly. You can't prove. I don't have to, I said, meeting his eyes. Because Richard already did. He filed it this morning. Ellen exhaled softly, relief mixed with awe. Lydia just sat there, trembling, her eyes glassy. You forged my name, I continued. Used my trust like a spare key. And for what? A few extra zeros in a bank account? You could have just asked for help. Her lip quivered. Dad, I thought. No, I said sharply. You didn't think. You calculated. There's a difference. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Daniel muttered something under his breath and stood up, heading for the door. Lydia didn't follow. She just sat there, small and broken in the home she'd tried to sell. I poured myself another glass of wine and leaned back. Dinner's over, I said softly. You should go. She lifted her head, eyes red. Please, Dad, I didn't mean to. Not tonight, I said. Tonight. You think about the difference between love and ownership. Tomorrow, maybe we'll talk. She hesitated, then stood slowly, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. As the door closed behind her, Ellen placed her hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Walter. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the one Lydia used to fill as a little girl, swinging her legs, laughing between bites of her mother's cooking. Maybe, I said quietly, but somehow, it doesn't feel like victory. Ellen squeezed my shoulder gently. It's not. It's survival. And as the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, I realized she was right. Sometimes, revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes, it just leaves the guilty alone with what they've done. and that silence can be the loudest punishment of all. The house was silent after Lydia left that night. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, half expecting her to walk back in, to say it was all a mistake, that she was sorry, that she hadn't meant any of it. But the door stayed closed. Outside, the wind carried the smell of wet leaves. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard. The old maple tree stood still under the streetlight, its branches heavy with rain. Margaret used to say that tree was our guardian, that as long as it stood, our home would too. That night, I believed her. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the table, and looked at the documents still spread out across the surface. The fake contract. The notarized one. The letter Lydia had written asking me to sell the house. Together, they told a story, one of deceit, greed, and a love that had rotted from neglect. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Hate is easy. It's loud and messy. But what I felt was quiet. Heavy. Like grief that had forgotten how to cry. The next few days passed slowly. Lydia didn't call. Daniel didn't show up. The realtor, Mark, sent a single email asking about payment confirmation, which I forwarded straight to Richard. 2 hours later, Richard called to tell me that both men were being investigated for real estate fraud, and that my daughter's name was officially tied to none of it, thanks to the way he'd structured the contract. She's free of the legal mess, he said, but she's going to have to live with the moral one. That was enough for me. Ellen stopped by that evening, carrying a small box of muffins. You holding up, Walter? She asked softly. I smiled weakly. I'm holding. That's something. She sat beside me, folding her hands neatly. You know, she'll come back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But guilt, it's like water. It always finds its way home. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Days turned into weeks. The leaves fell, the air grew cold, and I found myself talking to Margaret's photograph more often than I'd like to admit. I didn't yell at her. I'd whisper. I didn't curse. I just showed her the truth. That's what you'd have wanted, isn't it? The photo never answered, but sometimes I imagined she smiled, just a little. Then, one rainy afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Lydia was standing there. No makeup, no polished hair, just my daughter, small, tired, trembling under the rain. Dad, she said quietly. I stepped aside without a word. She entered like someone crossing into a church, her eyes darting around the familiar walls. The house smelled like cinnamon and dust. I'd been baking for the first time in months, trying to fill the silence. I don't know where to start, she said finally. Start anywhere, I said, sitting down. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking. I was stupid. Daniel convinced me the house was too much for you, that if we sold it, I could help you manage the money. He said it'd be easier that way. But it wasn't about you. It was about him. He wanted control, and I let him use me. Her eyes glistened. When you told me about the notarized contract, I realized what I'd done. And then, when Daniel found out he was under investigation, he left. Just like that. He blocked my number. Moved out. I lost my job too. The company didn't want my name tied to the scandal. I ruined everything, Dad. She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I waited. When she finally looked up, her mascara was streaked, her eyes red and raw. The same eyes that used to sparkle when she showed me her report cards as a little girl. Do you hate me? She whispered. I shook my head. No, I'm just disappointed that you forgot who you are. She swallowed hard. Can you forgive me? Forgiveness isn't something I give, I said softly. It's something you earn. But I'll tell you this, the door will always be open. Not the same as before, but open. She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you. For a long moment, we just sat there, the rain tapping against the windows, the house breathing quietly around us. I could see the little girl she used to be, the one who danced barefoot in the living room while Margaret played the piano. For a moment, it was almost like those days again. Almost. She stayed for dinner. I cooked her favorite, roasted chicken with garlic and rosemary. She barely ate, but that wasn't the point. We talked, cautiously, like strangers trying to remember how to be family. Before she left, she stood at the doorway, her hand trembling on the frame. Dad, she said, I want to make it right. Somehow. I smiled faintly. Then start by being honest. With yourself first. Everything else will follow. She nodded and walked out into the rain. I watched her until she disappeared beyond the maple tree. After she was gone, I sat back down, letting the quiet fill the house again. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something close. Something like healing. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Sometimes revenge isn't about punishment. It's about truth. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply letting someone face the mirror they've been avoiding. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark. "Good night, Margaret." I think she finally heard us. Winter came early that year. The first snow arrived like a whisper, covering the yard in white silence. From my kitchen window, I could see the old maple bending gently under the weight, still standing, still strong. It had been almost a month since Lydia's visit. She called sometimes now, not every day, not even every week, but when she did, it wasn't about money or favors. It was just, "How are you, Dad?" Or "Did you eat today?" Simple things. Honest things. I never said much back. I didn't have to. The space between us wasn't filled with anger anymore. It was filled with lessons neither of us could put into words. Still, I couldn't help wondering how she was doing. After all, I'd spent 72 years taking care of people, and habits like that don't die easily. So one afternoon, I took the old bus into town. The city had changed, new stores, new lights, but the same winter air biting through my coat. Lydia's apartment wasn't hard to find. She'd moved out of the fancy downtown condo she once bragged about and now lived in a small complex on the quieter side of town. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street for a few minutes, watching. Through the frosted window, I saw her sitting at a tiny kitchen table, laptop open, a stack of papers beside her. She looked tired, but focused, determined. There were no designer clothes now, no champagne glasses, no laughing crowd. Just a woman alone, working late into the night. And somehow, that sight warmed me more than anything else could. When I got home, I sat by the fire and thought about Margaret. I imagined what she'd say if she were still here. "She needed to fall," she'd whisper. "That's how people remember the ground they stand on." A few days later, Lydia showed up at my door again, unannounced, cheeks red from the cold. She held a folder in her hands. "I started a new job," she said shyly. "Administrative work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I thought you'd want to see." She showed me her employment contract, proud as a child showing her first drawing. I smiled. "I'm proud of you, Lydia," I said. "Not for the job, for choosing to begin again." She nodded, tears glistening but unfallen. "I'm trying. Trying's enough," I said softly. For the next hour, we sat together by the fire. She talked about her new routine, how she was taking evening classes in accounting, how she'd sold most of her expensive things to pay off the debt Daniel left her with. "I was angry at you for a while," she admitted quietly. "Not because of what you did, but because you didn't yell. You didn't fight back. You just let me see myself. That was worse." I looked at her, my heart heavy and proud all at once. That's because shouting never changed anyone. But silence, real silence, makes people listen. She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "I hear it every day." As she spoke, I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't coming to me for forgiveness anymore. She was coming for connection, for the small, ordinary kind of love that doesn't need to be earned or explained. When she left that evening, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. "I'll come by Sunday," she said. "We'll make Mom's pancakes." I watched her car disappear down the snowy road. The house didn't feel as empty afterward. That night, I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Revenge ends where understanding begins. Some debts can't be repaid in money, only in change." The following week, Ellen stopped by, bringing her usual thermos of coffee. She'd become my closest confidant through all this, steady, kind, and wise in the quiet ways that come with loss. "So," she said, sitting across from me, "how's Lydia?" "She's learning," I said. "And maybe I am too." Ellen smiled. "You taught her without teaching. That's rare." I chuckled. "Margaret used to say patience was my curse. Looks like it turned out to be your strength," she replied. We sat there for a while, the warmth of the fire wrapping around us, the smell of pine logs and coffee filling the air. In the distance, I could hear children laughing, neighborhood kids throwing snowballs, their joy echoing against the walls of my old house. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt since Margaret passed away. Peace. The kind that doesn't erase pain but lives beside it, quietly, like an old friend. That night, as I turned off the lights and walked down the hall, I paused by the door to Lydia's old room. The air smelled faintly of lavender, her mother's perfume. On the desk lay one of Lydia's childhood drawings, framed years ago, a stick figure family standing under a big maple tree, smiling. I smiled back. People change. They break, they fall, they heal. But if you're lucky, if you wait long enough, sometimes they find their way home again. I closed the door gently and whispered to the dark. She's learning, Margaret. She's really learning. Then I went to bed, not as a man who'd won, but as a father who'd finally stopped losing. It was early spring when Lydia began visiting every weekend. At first, she came for an hour or two, helping with groceries, cleaning the porch, cooking small dinners. Then, slowly, her visits stretched longer. Sometimes she'd stay the whole day, just sitting by the window with her tea, talking about life, work, or nothing at all. I never asked her about Daniel again. I didn't need to. The silence around his name said enough. What mattered was that she was there, not as a guest, not as someone trying to make amends, but as my daughter again. The first Sunday, she brought homemade pie. It was a little burnt on the edges, but she was proud of it. I used Mom's recipe, she said. Well, tried to. The smell of cinnamon and apple filled the kitchen, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Margaret's laughter echoed faintly in my mind, and I could almost see her wiping flour off Lydia's cheek, just like she used to. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. As we ate, Lydia told me about her job. Steady, simple work at an accounting office. Nothing glamorous, but she spoke about it with a kind of peace I hadn't heard in her voice for years. I like it, she said. I get to help people with their finances, make sure they don't fall into the traps I once did. That's good, I said, smiling faintly. Teaching others through your own mistakes. That's how wisdom is built. She laughed softly. Guess I learned from the best. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. A few weeks later, she came by with a folder and a nervous smile. Dad, I've been working on something, she said. I didn't want to show you until I was sure. Inside the folder were printed photos and architectural sketches of my house. What's this? I asked. An idea, she said quickly. I've been taking some design classes online. I want to renovate the old guest room into a small study for you. New lighting, fixed floorboards, maybe repaint the walls. Not for resale, she added quickly. Just for you. I looked at her, genuinely speechless. She continued. I'll cover the costs myself. It's not much, but I want to do something right this time. Something that adds to your life instead of taking away from it. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words settling deep in my chest. You don't have to do that, Lydia, I said quietly. I know, she replied, but I want to. We went through the sketches together, laughing at her exaggerated notes. Add bookshelf for Dad's ancient novels. Fix that damn squeaky floor. Keep Mom's curtains, non-negotiable. For the first time, it felt like we were building something together again. Not just a room, but trust. When she left that evening, she hugged me tighter than usual. You'll see, she whispered. I'll make it beautiful. Over the next few weeks, she kept her promise. She spent her weekends sanding walls, painting trim, measuring shelves. I tried to help, but she wouldn't let me. You've done enough building for one lifetime, she'd say, handing me my coffee and sending me back to my chair. Ellen came by often, watching the transformation unfold. She's making up for it, she said one afternoon as we stood by the doorway, watching Lydia work. I think she's making peace, I replied. By the end of May, the study was finished. Soft beige walls, sunlight pouring through freshly cleaned windows, a sturdy oak desk at the center. On the wall hung a single framed photo. Lydia as a child, sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing in front of the maple tree. She stood beside me, nervous. Well, I took a deep breath. The scent of paint and wood filled the room. It felt new, but familiar, like life had looped back, giving me something I didn't know I'd lost. It's perfect, I said. She smiled, relieved. I thought you'd say that. I looked at the photo again. Why this picture? She hesitated. Because that's how I remember you before everything got complicated. I wanted this room to remind both of us who we used to be. I nodded slowly. You chose well. For a while, we stood there in silence. Then she said softly, I know I can't undo what I did. but I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that kind of hurt again." I turned to her, my throat tight. "Lydia, life isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about learning to live with them and still love through them." She looked down, her eyes wet. "You always know what to say." I chuckled. "No, I just learned what not to say too late." We both laughed, not the loud, careless laughter of before, but the kind that comes from survival. That night, after she left, I sat in the new study with the lamp on. The room glowed softly in the evening light. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Sometimes, revenge becomes forgiveness. And forgiveness, when earned, becomes something even rarer, peace." The maple tree swayed gently outside the window, its leaves shimmering under the moonlight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by what had been lost. Instead, I felt surrounded by what remained: love, quiet and imperfect, but alive. And somewhere deep inside, I knew Margaret would have been proud. June arrived with soft winds and golden mornings. The maple tree outside my window was full again, its leaves rustling like quiet applause every time the breeze passed through. The days had grown gentler, and so had my heart. Lydia kept her promise. She came every Sunday without fail, bringing homemade soup or pie, sometimes flowers from the farmer's market. She never came empty-handed, not because she thought she owed me anything, but because giving had become her new language. One Sunday, she arrived earlier than usual, her face lit up with the kind of nervous excitement I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. "Don't make any plans next weekend," she said as soon as she stepped through the door. "Oh," I asked, setting down my mug. "Should I be worried?" She grinned. "No, just trust me for once." "Trust you?" I teased. "That's risky business these days." She rolled her eyes, laughing. "You'll see. Just promise me you'll be ready by 10 a.m. And with that, she refused to say another word. The following week, I found myself pacing by the window like a teenager waiting for his date. At exactly 10, her car pulled into the driveway, a modest little sedan this time, not the flashy SUV from before. She waved through the windshield, her smile wide and genuine. "Come on, old man," she called. "We've got to drive ahead." I climbed in, and off we went. The road wound through green hills and quiet back roads, sunlight flashing between the trees. She kept the radio low, humming softly along to some old 70s song Margaret used to love. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't want to ruin the surprise. After about 40 minutes, she turned down a narrow gravel path that led to a small park I hadn't visited in years. As soon as the car stopped, I recognized it: Willow Creek Park, where we used to picnic when Lydia was a child. The air smelled of grass and river water, the sound of birds echoing from the trees. She helped me out of the car and led me down a short path toward a shaded clearing. There, under a wide willow tree, stood something I hadn't expected at all: a bench. A simple wooden bench, freshly varnished, with a small bronze plaque attached to the backrest. The inscription read, "In loving memory of Margaret and Walter Hensley, for teaching that love is patient, even when hearts are not." My breath caught. "Lydia." She smiled softly. "I had to. This is where we came when Mom was still here. Remember? You used to chase me around that tree until I fell in the grass and pretended I couldn't get up." I chuckled, the memory flooding back. Margaret's laughter, Lydia's small hand in mine, the sun dipping low across the water. "You shouldn't have done this," I said quietly, though my voice trembled with gratitude. "I needed to," she said. "I wanted a place that reminded me of what I almost lost, and what I still have." We sat down together on the bench. The wood was warm from the sun, the river glimmering just beyond the reeds. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The world felt suspended, only the soft hum of life around us, the steady rhythm of forgiveness settling between two people who had finally stopped running from their pain. After a while, Lydia reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo frame. Inside was the picture from the study, the one of her sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing under the maple tree. She set it gently on the bench between us. "Now we're all together again," she whispered. I turned my head toward her. "You've come a long way, Lydia." She smiled through her tears. "So have you, Dad." I laughed softly. "I didn't go anywhere." "Yes, you did," she said. "You went through hell, and you came back still loving me. That's farther than most fathers ever go." The words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked fast, the sunlight blurring through the tears I didn't bother to hide. She took my hand, small, warm, trembling just a little, and for the first time in years, I felt whole again. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You already have," I whispered. "You remembered who you are." We sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, about Margaret's favorite songs, about Lydia's plans to volunteer at the community center, about how the world seemed smaller and kinder when you stopped fighting it. As the sun began to set, the sky turned the same orange-gold color it had on the day I married Margaret. The light filtered through the willow leaves, painting Lydia's face in soft warmth. "You know," I said, "your mother always believed you'd come back. She used to tell me, Lydia's got her father's heart. She just doesn't know it yet." Lydia smiled, tears glistening. Guess she was right. When we finally stood to leave, she touched the plaque one last time, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. But I didn't ask. Some words aren't meant to be shared, only felt. As we walked back to the car, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The bench stood under the willow, glowing softly in the fading light. And I realized something profound. This wasn't just a memorial. It was a promise. A promise that pain could change form, that grief could become gratitude, and that love, real love, could survive even the ugliest truths. That night, when we returned home, Lydia hugged me at the door and said, "Don't open your mail tomorrow until I get here. Deal?" I laughed. "Another surprise?" "Maybe," she said, winking. "But this one's not about the past. It's about the future." Then she drove off, headlights fading into the night, leaving me with a heart that, for the first time in years, felt full. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, thin and golden, painting the old wooden table in warmth. A light breeze carried the scent of lilacs from the yard. I poured my coffee and noticed the mail waiting on the porch, an envelope with Lydia's handwriting. She'd written, "Don't open until I get there." I smiled. She was late, as usual. At 11, her car appeared at the end of the drive. She stepped out in a pale yellow dress, the same color her mother used to love. Her face glowed with that quiet peace people carry only after they've truly forgiven themselves. "Morning, Dad," she said, setting a bakery box on the table. "Blueberry scones. The lady said they're best warm, like you." "Flattery will get you nowhere," I teased. She laughed. "Then at least let me give you your surprise." She placed the envelope in front of me. My name, written carefully in her looping script, looked softer than I remembered. "Go on," she urged. Inside was a single piece of paper, official, stamped, notarized. For a moment my heart skipped. I'd seen too many legal documents lately to expect good news. Then I read the title. Transfer of Property, Beneficiary Trust. Below it, in neat print, were the words, "The Hensley family home shall remain in trust for the lifetime of Walter Hensley and, upon his passing, be donated to the Willow Creek Community Fund to provide housing and education support for families in need." At the bottom was Lydia's signature. I looked up. "Lydia, what is this?" She took a breath. "I talked to your lawyer. The house stays yours for as long as you live, and after, well, it helps others. Mom always said this place was built on kindness. I thought it should stay that way." My throat tightened. "You don't want it?" She shook her head. "I already got what I needed from it. The lessons. The second chance." For a long moment I couldn't speak. I ran my fingers across the signature, the ink still slightly raised. Margaret would have loved this. She'd always dreamed the house could become a place of good when we were gone, a safe haven for someone else's beginning. "You didn't have to do this," I said finally. "I did," she whispered, "because keeping it would have been ownership. Letting it give life again, that's love." Outside, the maple tree swayed, scattering tiny green leaves across the porch like confetti. We spent the afternoon together in the new study she'd built, her curled on the couch with her laptop, me at the desk reading the newspaper. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable, familiar, like an old song rediscovered. At one point she looked up and said, "You know, Dad, if Mom could see us now, she'd probably say we finally learned to listen." "She'd say it took us long enough," I replied, and we both laughed. As evening settled, she stood and looked around the room. "Promise me something?" "What's that?" "Don't ever stop writing in that notebook. Your stories, they're not just about you anymore. They're about everyone who's ever needed time to come home." I nodded, too moved to answer. She kissed my forehead gently and left before dusk, leaving the faint scent of lilac behind. After she drove off, I went outside. The air was cool and still. The maple tree cast a long shadow across the yard, and the first fireflies began to glow in the grass. I walked to the base of the tree and rested my hand on its rough bark. For a moment, I imagined Margaret standing beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "She's home," I murmured. And somewhere, deep in the quiet evening, I could almost hear her say, "So are you." I went back inside, sat at my desk, and opened my notebook one final time. There are many kinds of revenge, but only one worth keeping. The revenge of becoming better than the pain that tried to break you. I set down the pen, closed the book, and looked around at the house that had held a lifetime of laughter, loss, and forgiveness. Every wall carried a story, every floorboard, a heartbeat. And for the first time, I didn't feel like its owner. I felt like its guardian, until it was ready to protect someone new. As the clock struck 9, I turned off the lamp and glanced through the window. The bench beneath the willow stood quietly under the fading light, waiting for whoever needed its peace next. The future no longer scared me. It simply waited, softly, patiently, like the morning after a long storm.